1 Kings chapter 19, if you're not already over there. Last week we studied the contest on Mount Carmel, and of course read about how Elijah challenged the prophets of Baal to a contest to see which God was the true God, Jehovah God or Baal. And of course Elijah won that contest. That's kind of an understatement, but they ended up, remember, killing, the people did, killing all the prophets of Baal. And tonight we're going to read about Jezebel's reaction to that, and really Ahab's reaction too, and then how that affected Elijah as a servant of God. And question number one on your sheet's kind of an introductory question, but how many of us have ever felt alone in life? And I don't mean, like you're the only person at home or something like that, but how many have ever felt like maybe you're alone in stance for the truth or in caring about, something that's important? Anybody ever been in that situation? I think probably all of us have. And generally speaking, whenever you feel alone, what other characteristics or emotions come along with that?
Sadness.
Yeah, sadness.
Despair.
Yes, despair, hopelessness, and generally, what do those feelings lead to?
Self-pity.
Yeah, self-pity and something else too. Doubt, yeah. Discouragement, maybe. When you feel like you're the only person who's willing to stand up for what's right, or you're the only person who cares about something that's important, that's discouraging, isn't it? And that's kind of the situation here that Elijah was in. Elijah, when you study Elijah, he was one of the great prophets of God. And even though he was a great prophet of God, he suffered from discouragement. And so that tells me that's probably something that all of us are going to experience at some time in our lives. And so let's study about what God did to encourage Elijah when he was in this situation, and what we can learn from that today. Let's go over to 1 Kings chapter 19 if you're not already there, and I need a volunteer to read the first 8 verses for us, please.
And Ahab told Jezebel all that Elijah had done, and with all he had slain all the prophets with the sword. Then Jezebel sent a messenger unto Elijah, saying, So let the gods do to me, and more also, if I make not thy life as the life of one of them by tomorrow about this time. And when he saw that he arose and went for his life, he came to Beersheba, where belongeth to Judea, and left his servant there. But he himself went a day's journey into the wilderness. He came and sat down under a juniper tree, and he requested for himself that he might die, and said, It is enough now, O Lord, take away my life, for I am not better than my fathers. And as he lay and slept under a juniper tree, behold, then an angel touched him and said unto him, Arise and eat. And he looked, and behold, there was a cake baking on the coals, and a cruse of water at his head. And he did eat and drink, and laid him down again. And the angel of the Lord came again the second time, and touched him, and said, Arise and eat, because the journey is too great for thee. And he arose and did eat and drink, and went in the strength of that meat 40 days and 40 nights unto Horeb, the mount of God.
Okay, so we read about last week the reaction of the people to this contest that obviously, again, Elijah won, or I guess more accurately, we should say Jehovah God won. And so I think Elijah, probably expected Ahab and Jezebel to react a lot differently than what they did. And so question number 2 is, why was Jezebel so determined to kill Elijah? Right? She sends a servant to him and tells him, if I don't do to you what you guys did to all these prophets of Baal tomorrow, then the curse of the gods come upon me. So why was she so determined to kill him?
Those were her prophets. That she was behind all that.
Yeah, she was she was passionate about Baal worship, wasn't she? And again, you can see, we studied last week how evidently she'd ordered this massacre of the prophets of God, and probably in an effort to try to worship or wipe out the worship of Jehovah God. And so she was very passionate about Baal worship, and basically, in one single act and in one day, Elijah had caused the hearts of the children of Israel to defiantly turn away from Baal and to very adamantly turn to Jehovah God. And so to say she was enraged with this action is again, probably an understatement. All the people, though, and this is what's interesting to me, if Jezebel really wanted to kill Elijah, why didn't she just send somebody right there to arrest him and take him back and kill him? Right? She sends a servant. The servant has no trouble finding him. And she kind of gives him a heads up or a warning, doesn't she? So why do you think she would do that?
Afraid of people, maybe?
Yeah, I would say so. All the people have rallied behind Elijah, haven't they? And all of them have said, Jehovah is God. Baal is not a god. And so what do you think the reaction of the people would have been if Jezebel had arrested Elijah and put him to death? Well, I don't think they've been too favorable with that outcome. And so what do you think she might have been trying to accomplish here? Well, what was Elijah's reaction to it? Yeah, he ran away. And so if you can't just grab him and kill him because of the fear of the people, then the next best thing that you can do is get him out of it, right? And so I think what she intended to do was to threaten him so that he would run away and the people would no longer have a leader. And she was probably hoping by doing that, she could change their focus back to Baal. But it's interesting, again, if she wanted to kill him, why did she send a servant to warn him and give him a heads up? Why didn't she just send somebody down there and kill him right then and right there? Number 3 here, Elijah takes off running. And what did Elijah pray when he had finally fled to a place where I guess he at least stopped to rest?
Ask the Lord to take away his life.
Yeah, his prayer was for the Lord to let him die. And why was that the case? Why did he want to die?
He wasn't any better than his father.
Yeah, I think he felt like he'd had enough. He'd been out here and he'd been working hard, and he'd done everything that the Lord had told him to do. And what he expected to happen, of course, isn't actually what happened. And he kind of reached the end of his rope, I think. And so his thought was, there's nothing more that I can do. Anything that could possibly change the mind of Ahab or Jezebel has been done, and there's no more work that I can do. So that's it. Take me to heaven. It's time for my life to be over. Question number 4, and this is kind of a little bit of thought question here, but do you think that Elijah was justified in being discouraged by the circumstances that he was surrounded with?
I would be.
I would be too.
I'm going to say I don't see that everybody at that time did. I mean, they did. Lord God he's Jehovah's God. But wishy-washy as people are, apparently they didn't stick too close, because he goes off and says, I'm the only one left.
Yeah.
So I'm kind of like today. And you mentioned somebody goes up for a ride. That sounds real good. Get a whole group together, and boy, everybody's there, and then you get there, and you're the only one standing.
Yeah.
Everybody else is left.
Yeah.
And so is he justified? I have a hard time thinking, I do it, but I have a hard time thinking, I've never been able to call fire down that heaven. There's some things that just don't, James is a man just like me. Well, he is, because he runs scared when we ought to stand up and realize what we're doing.
Yeah, that would be, I think, probably every human's typical reaction when your life is threatened, to run away, right? I mean, generally speaking, we're not going to have the courage to stand up and say, well, just take it, you know. But there's a few things I think that contributed, you know, to his being discouraged. Certainly he was mentally exhausted, I mean, from the events that had transpired. But he was also physically exhausted, wasn't he? I mean, you read about him when he gets out there, what does he do? Yeah, he goes to sleep. Now, if you were running for your life, would you go to sleep? That's not generally something we would do, right? And this angel comes and wakes him up, you know, and he eats something. What does he do right after he eats? Goes right back to sleep, right? So when you're in a state where you're mentally and physically exhausted, it's easy to get discouraged, isn't it? And I think that's part of the reason that Elijah is where he's at here. He's obviously disappointed in the king's reaction and the queen's reaction. You know, I think he thought something greater would happen because of this. Because, you know, how do you stand there and watch something like that if you're Ahab and then not go to the side of Jehovah God? So sometimes, you know, whenever we try to push God's will and God's word forward, in other words, we're the messenger, or we're the cog, so to speak, and things don't happen like we think they should, does that make us feel like a failure? Well, how did Samuel feel when the people wanted to appoint a king over Israel? Remember what God told him? Yeah, he said, they haven't rejected you, right? I think Samuel was feeling a little bit like he failed. You know, they hadn't rejected you, but they rejected me. And so failure, you know, whether it's imagined or whether it's real or whether it's exaggerated, whenever we feel like we failed, does that make you feel discouraged? I don't think anybody feels good whenever we feel like we failed. And so obviously that would be something I think that Elijah would have expected too. So he felt like there was nothing else that he could do. And failure, you know, it's one of those one of the hardest feelings to deal with. Again, whether it's real or not, or whether we just imagine it, or whether we exaggerate, whether the failure that we've had is minor into what we think it is. And that's kind of the point that Elijah was at. So, you know, I can understand from a human standpoint how he could feel this way and how he could get discouraged, because probably all of us have been in a similar situation at some time in our lives. All right, let's go to verse 9. Anybody have any thoughts or comments or anything? Let's go to verse 9, and somebody read verses 9 through 18 for us.
There he went into a cave and spent the night in that place. And behold, the word of the Lord came unto him. And he said to him, what are you doing here, Elijah? And he said, I have been very zealous for the Lord God of hosts, for the children of Israel have forsaken your covenant, torn down your altars, and killed your prophets with the sword. I alone am left, and they seek to take my life. And then he said, go out and stand on the mountain before the Lord. And behold, the Lord passed by, and a great strong wind tore the mountains, and broke the rocks in pieces before the Lord. But the Lord was not in the wind, and after the wind was an earthquake. But the Lord was not in the earthquake, and after the earthquake was fire. The Lord was not in the fire, and after the fire a still small voice. So it was when Elijah heard it, that he wrapped his face in his mantle and went out and stood in the entrance of the cave. Suddenly a voice came to him and said, what are you doing here, Elijah? And he said, I have been very zealous for the Lord God of hosts, because the children of Israel have forsaken your covenant, torn down your altars, and killed your prophets with the sword. I alone am left, and they seek to take my life. Then the Lord said to him, go return on your way to the wilderness of Damascus. When you arrive, anoint Hazael king over Syria. Also you shall anoint Jehu the son of Nimshi as king over Israel, and Elisha the son of Shaphat of Abel of Maholah you shall anoint as prophet in your place. It shall be that whoever escapes the sword of Hazael, Jehu will kill, and whoever escapes the sword of Jehu, Elisha will
Okay, so question 5 here is, what did God say to Elijah whenever he took refuge in a cave?
What are you doing here?
Yeah, what are you doing here? And, I mean, you think about Elijah, what is he doing there? I mean, he's obviously there because he's scared for his life, right? He's running away from the threat that Jezebel made toward him. He feels defenseless. You know, he feels like there's nothing that he can do to protect himself. He feels helpless probably in the situation. You know, he doesn't really know what to do. And so, again, in the human mind, the only natural reaction is to run away. Now, one of the things that he's forgotten about is in all of this is that, you know, while Jezebel launched this massacre of the Lord's prophet, and while there was this tremendous famine in the land, who was caring for him? He wasn't defenseless, right? He wasn't helpless because God had been caring for him. And so God had been with him during all that time. And now he's out here and he's scared and he's running for his life. And God says, what are you doing here, Elijah? So God prepares Elijah to hear the message that he's going to give him. And the presence of God passes by him. And how does it do that? What disturbances do we read within the natural world take place as God passes by? Okay, yeah, the first one is a ferocious wind, right? And it's so strong of a wind that it's actually blowing rocks, around on the mountain. And so the wind passes by, but the Lord wasn't in the wind, right? And then we have the earthquake, where the mountain itself would have literally shaken, but God wasn't in that earthquake. And then you have this blazing fire, that passes by Elijah. And so question 7, in which of these manifestations was God present? None of them, right? So what do you think the purpose of those things are? Right? Obviously, God wasn't manifesting himself to Elijah in those things, so why did God show him those things? Okay, to remind him maybe of his power? What else?
His control over it, maybe over nature itself, but, we all, or I think we all, if you're behind a tornado and see the damage you can do, or wildfires, and see what it can do, you may, I've never been in an earthquake, so keep talking about that. It's unbelievable power that is
Yeah. Yeah, and like you said, to illustrate that God is in control of those things. God's in control of the natural world, in other words, right? Yes, sir.
Verse 11 says that behold, the Lord passed by, and then all this happened afterwards. They keep the next one, he said, okay, he's the one that controls this, that's what's following to me.
Could be. It's interesting again that God was in none of those things. But after all these things happen, in the midst of this ferocious wind, God doesn't yell at Elijah, or in the midst of this earthquake, God doesn't speak to him, or even in this blazing fire that passes by. But how does God speak to him? Yeah, in other words, kind of a whisper or a soft voice, right? And so, what do you think we can learn about that? Question 9.
Our God is in tiny small world.
Do what?
Our God is in tiny small world.
Yeah.
It says that in Proverbs, where was that?
How does God move men? It's through his word, isn't it? It's through speaking to them. And it's interesting, even when you think about Adam and Eve from the beginning, how did God dissuade them and persuade them, dissuade them from doing what's wrong, persuade them to do what's right? It's through speaking, wasn't it? It wasn't through a giant earthquake. It wasn't through a blazing fire. And the way that God often, when he speaks to men, sometimes it's a loud voice when you read about it in the Bible. But most of the time it's not. I mean, it's through logic and reason and plain speech that God appeals to the heart of man, doesn't it? And so that's how he motivates and that's how he moves men. And so, yes, it's a reminder of God's in control of the natural world. You know, it's a reminder of the power of God himself. But then the fact that God almost speaks to him very softly. You know, when you think about how God deals with us as men, does he deal with us harshly like we should be dealt with? No, he's gentle, isn't he? And so I think, again, you have that reminder in the way that God deals with Elijah here. So, why does God reveal himself to Elijah? What was the purpose of all this? Yeah, the fact that, again, he's in control, right? He has power over the natural world to observe the great power of God. And I know that Elijah has probably witnessed one of the greatest miracles that we read about in the Bible, but still he was a man. And you read about the Israelites, they were very quick to forget about the miracles too that they saw. But to remember those things would have helped to encourage him, wouldn't it? And that's really what all this is about. And you know, God reminds him, you know, the work that you did. Elijah thought it was over, right? It was done with. Okay, this is the end of the line. There's nothing more that can be done. And he says, no, the work's just started. Okay, you just begun it. And then Hazael, king of Syria, is going to continue it on. And then we're going to have Jehu, who's also going to carry it on. And then somebody's going to step up into your role and continue the work. And that is Elisha that we're going to read about later. And so for him, he thought it was over, but really it was just beginning. And that's, I think, what God is telling him. And that, again, had to be encouraging. It's not all over. It's not done with yet. So how many faithful worshipers, number 11 here, did God report to be present in Israel? Yeah, 7,000. Again, why do you think he told him that? Yeah, encouragement, right? Whenever we stand up for what's right and we think, well, I'm the only one, you know, who's going to do what's right, or I'm the only one who cares, and then you find out there's somebody else, what does that do? Well, that lifts your spirit, doesn't it? It encourages you. And so he tells Elijah, listen, there's 7,000 people who have not bowed their knee to Baal or worshiped him in any way in this country. And so there were 7,000 other people who were fully and totally committed to God, just like Elijah was. And again, that had to be encouraged. They had to lift up the spirits of Elijah. Question 12, we kind of covered that, but the question is, have you ever felt that you're the only one doing or standing up for right? And of course, I think all of us said, we've been in that situation. It's a very discouraging situation. And so what needs to be done when somebody's in that situation? Yeah, they need to be encouraged, right? And that's all across the board. Listen, we're talking about Elijah, one of the greatest prophets to ever serve God. And he got discouraged. He needed to be lifted up. He needed to be encouraged. Do preachers need to be encouraged today? You better believe it. Do elders need to be encouraged? Do deacons? Do Christians? Do men need to be encouraged? Do women need to be encouraged? Do people who've been members of the church for 50 years need to be encouraged? Do people who've been members of the church for 5 minutes need to be encouraged? Yeah. I mean, it's all across the board, isn't it? And so when somebody's discouraged, the best thing that we can do is try to encourage them. And the way that we do that is standing up for what's right, just like they do, but also, you know, reminding them, hey, God's in control here. You know, God's got this covered. He's in control of the natural world. Things are going to happen. We may not be able to see all of God's plan. We may think it's the end, but it may actually be the beginning, like he was talking about to Elijah. So, good lesson there. Anybody? Yes, sir.
Just a comment. I'm sure I'm not the only one seeing this. You know, we go travel by the list that we used to now go to fire. Going to church and places that you're on vacation or visiting, you see the other people in the congregation. That's encouraging. And a few years ago, we were in Smoky Mountain Park, you know, and went to church over there. And
Yeah.
That was encouraging.
Yeah, and that's always, like you say, it's always a blessing to be able to see that for yourself, isn't it? And for Elijah to hear those words, 7,000 people fully committed to God, just like he was, that had to be overwhelming and probably surprising in the same breath, but still encouraging for him, to want to go back, to have something to go back for. All right, let's read verses 19 through 21 here in the end of the chapter. Somebody, please.
So he departed from there and found Elisha, the son of Shaphat, while he was plowing with 12 pairs of oxen before him. And he went with the 12, and Elijah passed over to him and threw his mantle on him. He left the oxen and ran after Elijah and said, "Please let me kiss my father and my mother, then I will follow you." And he said to them, "Go back again, for what have I done to you?" So he returned from following him and took the pair of oxen and sacrificed them and boiled their flesh with the implements of the oxen, and he gave it to the people, and they ate. Then he rose and followed Elijah and ministered to him.
Okay, so number 13 here. What symbolic action did Elijah perform here whenever he found Elisha? Yeah, he cast his mantle on him, and evidently that was kind of a symbolic way of a person taking over another person's position. And so by Elijah doing that, his implication was that Elisha was going to be the next prophet of God, or he was going to take over the work that he was doing. Did Elijah force him to do that?
Ask it again.
I said, did Elijah force him? Elisha, I'll get it right here in a minute. Did Elijah force Elisha to become the next prophet of God? No. In fact, when you look at it, Elisha says, hold on a minute, and let me go tell my family goodbye, and I'll be back. And Elijah's like, well, whatever, you decide for yourself. There wasn't really anything that made him do what he wanted to do, or to do that, or to take over. But as you read about Elisha, it's obvious that he has a passion to do this, doesn't he? He has a tremendous desire in his heart to carry on this work and to follow in the footsteps of Elijah. And so, number 14 here, question 14. What did Elijah do when he called his family together before he left to follow? Yeah, got to eat and make it scriptural, right? I don't know why we always eat to celebrate, but that's biblical. So, but he did. They had a big feast, right? And the things that he had, those oxen and the plows that he was using. Question 15 here. How did he make a dramatic break with those things? Yeah, he broke up the plow, used it as wood, and they sacrificed the animals and ate it. And so it showed that he was fully committed to the task, wasn't it? And when you think about it, to be a prophet of God, man, you would have to be a committed person, wouldn't you? And Elisha was of course willing to do that. That prophet, you read about the things that Elijah went through, took complete obedience, took complete surrender. And Elisha was a good man to do that. And it's also interesting to me, Elisha wasn't just sitting around here looking for something to do, was he? I mean, he was busy. He was working. He was right in the middle of something. But when this call comes for him to be a prophet of God, he just takes what he's doing and throws it down, burns it up, and takes off and goes with Elijah. And so it's a good lesson for us in, whenever God tells us to do something, it's not when you get done, it's not when you get around to it, it's now. And good illustration of that. Yes, sir.
I've never noticed it before, but it says 12 yoke of oxen. So he must have been pretty successful or well-to-do at whatever he at farming here, because I don't figure every person had 12 yoke of oxen.
Probably not.
So he was walking away from something is what I'm getting to.
Yeah, very valuable. And oxen were valuable animals. I mean, in that day and age, that seemed remember Sunday morning we talked about the restoration of a thief. If a man stole an ox, you had to restore 5 oxen. If it was sheep, you only had to restore 4. Oxen was the way that people made a living back then. I mean, if you were a farmer, they were very, very important and valuable. And so the fact that he had 12 pair, like you said, shows, I think, a little bit about him. But he was a guy who left a lot behind. And, put that in perspective today. And the last question here, if somebody suddenly came up to us and said, throw everything you're doing down, leave everything behind, and go do this work for God, would you find that to be easy or difficult? Difficult is the answer. Difficult. Almost impossible, don't you think? But again, it shows you the heart of Elisha and the great love that he had for the Lord and the commitment that he was willing to make for him. So, all right, we're out of time, or at least we're up with the questions. Anybody? Yes, sir.
How much time did Elisha really have prior to making this commitment to Elijah?
I don't know. I mean, enough time to go back home and kill the animals and make a feast, I guess. But I don't know if there was a divine timeline that was put on it or not.
Because, like we were talking about, it'd be really hard for anybody to do that. And if he had just been plowing with oxen, I mean, if he'd just been a farmer or whatever, it kind of seems like, obviously the Lord had the hand in it and chose him. But,
Yeah.
it would seem.
I couldn't help but when I was thinking about it, we've been studying the apostles on Sunday evenings, and they were a lot like that too. I mean, when Jesus came and said, "Come and follow me," they put their nets down and they went. And that's hard to do. It's hard to understand from a human perspective, because when you're right in the middle of something, and somebody comes in and says, "Let's do this" or "Let's do that," generally say, "Well, hold on a minute. I got to finish this up, and then we'll go and do that." But again, I think it reflects the heart of those people.
Well, not everybody, even the apostles, had a job.
Yeah. So they weren't just sitting around waiting for the Lord to show up and give them something to do, were they?
Right.
So yeah, they were real people in real situations, and I don't think we probably appreciate that enough.
Not to take credit away from Elisha, but I figured he knew who Elijah was if he was a
Yeah.
godly man, and he knew what he had done. Those
Yeah.
stories would have spread like wildfire.
You bet.
So he would have known that when that guy comes to put his name on who this was and what this means.
Yeah.
So that would have been a big deal. Not
Yeah.
taking credit from him, he still would have been hard to walk away, but
Right. And there's a lot of people probably in that situation who wouldn't have walked away.
yeah.
But yeah, you're right from that. It wasn't a no knowledge sort of thing. He understood what was going on. So, all right.
Walk across the water, I'd probably stop out and follow. Be a little easier.
Yeah, it's easy to say. It's easy to say.
They see miracles. Not that, I think it may be easier. It's not going to be easy when we look at it.
Yeah.
When they see those things firsthand. Where we have the Bible, yes, absolutely. But we don't have the voice of God, miracles, those things too.
Yeah, we don't have those blessings, but we do have lots more knowledge than they ever thought about having. And we have a lot of blessings that they didn't have too. So,
40,000 miles away.
Yeah.
Too.
yeah. So they probably thought, man, if I knew how much they knew today, I wouldn't have any problem doing that. Yes, sir.
Yeah, but if we went out here in the parking lot and called far down into heaven, it might fill this church building once or twice, and then it would dribble off.
Yeah.
That's
Just human nature, isn't it? Yeah. All right, Lord willing, next week we'll study chapter 20.